So today my talk is on the Rapid Prototyper, and this is actually going to be the first time that I've given this talk. It's a newer talk for me in general. It's actually a distillation of my experience as a solutions architect working with companies in the serverless space. And as I was working my way through the different examples and prototypes and working with a couple of dev things, I realized there's actually a different story here that needs to be surfaced, and I think is important when we talk about cross-platform development. And it's kind of to answer the question of why are we doing cross-platform development, and why have these tools surfaced, and where is this industry going? So my talk will probably be the least flame war inducing talk of the night, but I'm okay with that. But I hope that it'll be educational, and we're going to actually look at a couple of interesting points here. So I call this the Rapid Prototyper Steps per Generation Build, and this is version 2 because I literally scrapped my initial idea, and this is what I have for you tonight. I hope that you enjoy it. I think there's some interesting insights here. Again, insights from my time working as a solutions architect, helping serverless companies or companies who are not embracing serverless come into this new era of development, speed, and iteration. Okay, so what are we going to learn? We're going to first learn why prototype. Like, why do we prototype at all? We're going to be learning how to sell to your boss prototyping. How do you create a culture of prototyping at your company? We're going to be looking at structuring the prototype process. So what is an effective strategy about how to actually go into prototyping? And this is going to relate to some cross-platform development as we go along, but just bear with me as we do this together. So what we're not going to learn is the slide I always like to include, and we're not going to learn what React is, because that's something that these conferences always tend to rehash over and over. And we're actually not even going to be learning how to build apps with X technology. We're not covering any of the frameworks tonight. We're literally talking about how do you embrace any tool in a way that actually will yield a high-performant outcome for your business. So a quick little bit about me. My name is Jesse Martin. I am the Senior Solutions Architect for GraphCMS. GraphCMS is a GraphQL-only content management system. We are all in on that. We believe highly in GraphQL as a technology. And you can find me at Motley Dev, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions. I'll even be doing a little demo, the initial demo that I've been preparing for tonight. I'll be doing that a little bit later, and I'll post that video online for you to access. But that's where you can find me. That's who I am. I am known these days for my very round, shiny head. All right, so we're going to start with why prototype. Well, in a culture of move fast and break things, embracing prototypes is the best form of damage control. I mean, really, we have this idea of we've embraced Agile, we've embraced these different paradigms for building applications, and we do want to move quickly. We do want to layer on fidelity to our process. And if we can break a prototype, then we will have saved ourselves and our customers hours and hours of frustration, and save our companies and our clients a lot of cost. And the reason why we prototype primarily is because, well, you want to sell something, they want to buy something, and to prototype, it is really the fastest way to solve for yes. How do we get to that yes quickly? And if we're able to show what we have in mind, or this vision that we're trying to tell our customers about, and if they're able to see that, they're going to be able to say, you know what, actually we can release this budget we had in mind. And we're able to say, yes, we actually were able to accomplish this. And frankly, why prototype? Well, nothing is a failure if you can call it a beta. That's actually more of a joke, kind of, but it actually creates a culture of mistakes are okay. As you work, and as you develop, and as you build, and as you iterate on this thing that you're creating, it is okay if something crashes, because it's something that you've clearly communicated to the client. This is the prototype of what it is that you are going to be delivering. This is not the thing that you've released yet. Okay, how to sell prototyping. This is actually more the important question. You're all relatively tech enthusiast people, so why prototype, I think, is something a little more clear. But how to sell prototyping, or basically creating a prototyping culture in the workplace. So point number one is building prototypes, or yeah, prototype building is building confidence in your team. You're able to say, you know what, we've actually overcome a lot of the architectural hurdles or some of the design patterns that we needed to solve for. We're increasingly growing in confidence that we can deliver this end product. And you may not even be, you may be prototyping in a POC phase where you may not even have secured the majority of the budget from the client or even from internally, or allocated the budget internally for what you're wanting to release. But you're able to say, you know what, this is actually something that we know we can do, and you're getting more and more confident as each release comes of this prototype process. Prototyping reveals the pitfalls. You're able to see early on, before people really give it the full go, is this thing viable? Will this be able to work in production? Will our early phase customers actually embrace this? That allows you to see and potentially mitigate those pitfalls early on, before the bulk of the work and the onboarding of the new developers and everything else begins. And frankly, prototypes create emotional investment. Like as a client is looking at the thing that you're creating, or customers looking at the thing you're creating, and they're seeing the app and they're remembering it, and they're getting some of that muscle memory, and they're starting to actually feel an emotional investment to this thing. It's not just about killing off the idea or stopping the project, throwing away the PowerPoint presentation. This is actually saying no to a real app that they're getting used to. So it creates a level of emotional investment that actually makes it harder for somebody to say no. It's essentially leveraging the sunk cost paradigm for your benefit. And then prototypes mean a lost pitch isn't walking away empty-handed. Okay, maybe the client says no, maybe internally the project gets axed, but what you have is a physical, real product to actually show. You can take this with you either as a portfolio piece if you're an indie dev, or you can take this and show it to the next meeting. The next time this conversation comes up, you could say, we think this idea still has legs, and here's what we pitched, because this is what we've already created. So you have something that's still concrete and physical, a real made thing, and that's why prototypes can really be so valuable. And pitching all of those to your boss really does help create a structured argument as to why embrace this culture of faster releases, creating a beta roadmap, and embracing this culture of prototyping. Okay, so we're going to come now to structuring the prototype process, and it looks like I'm just cruising here on time, so I think this talk's not going to take as long as we even needed. But the structuring of the prototype process, I have a couple of rules that I've broken down that I think help in the process, or in the designing of your internal prototyping culture. So first, we have what I refer to as the separation of responsibility. So we're all familiar as developers, and I guess not everybody here is a developer, but in the developer parlance, we have the separation of concerns. That is that we say, this one function basically is going to handle, or this one file handles everything that has to do with this one function. This one microservice handles everything that has to do with this one microservice. And we're able to split out the separation of concerns, so we're not crossing over into saying, okay, well, this file kind of has to touch over into that file, or these 4 services always have to go together, because if one of them's missing, they're going to break. We're able to create a little bit of resilience in our stack, where we can not only swap out various pieces. So I'm iterating on why separation of concerns is important. But when we talk about separation of responsibility, I think this actually creates a very important concept, one that I'd say is the most important that I have come across in any kind of a design and development workflow. And that is separating out the responsibility between the teams. So the typical workflow, and you see this surface a lot in the CMS space. And in the CMS space, what tends to happen is the content editor will be given the task of part-time designer, part-time UX expert, part-time content creator, right? So they'll be told by the design team that the brand version of red is hashtag whatever. They don't quite understand how a hashtag makes a color, but fine. They know that this is the key they have to paste in inside of the content editor, and they need to put this much spacing between the elements on their little WYSIWYG drag and drop CMS tool. And we're ahead of the CMS, so the whole WYSIWYG thing goes out the window anyways. But what we see is that this creates a lot of friction between the teams. And so the ideal scenario really is where you have these isolated teams in terms of responsibility with a lot of overlap in understanding what each person's doing and being able to say, okay, the design team is able to have some insights into what's happening in development and development to design, but they're not going to be trying to step into each other's territory. The design team's not trying to build out a little WYSIWYG mobile app or rebrushing the mobile app, and development's not trying to make design decisions, and the architect team isn't trying to tell the developers how to build. And so what you have is the separation of concerns, allowing each team to focus and specialize on what it is they know how to do. Designers design, architects do UX and content strategy, QA and user testing happens as well, where they can focus on what they need to do there, and development happens in its own silo as well. And now the word silo feels like a bad word, and it is if we mean it as enclosed walls and not having any sort of cross talk. But there is a way that we're able to allow the teams to focus in their specific cases of specialty, while still creating that synergy and that momentum of speed as a team in our prototyping process that at the moment gets lost as we start to use these tools that are really cumbersome and require everybody to sort of touch every part of the app process. And what I view this as, and what we've seen surface again and again with our customers that makes a lot of sense, is that first, you need to create a form of a shared vocabulary. And I'll come back and touch on what I mean with this in a minute. But you need to have a shared vocabulary that all the teams know what we're talking about. And then we have this cross-department awareness as well, so that there needs to be a feedback loop where each of the departments is able to communicate blockers or interest or areas where they could actually help each other without getting each other's way or being required to sort of take on some responsibility from each person's team. So when I talk about shared vocabulary, what I mean is just two concepts that we use a lot. One is the generation or the creation of design tokens. And this is where we start to come into the cross-platform a little bit. And then the idea as well of UX mapping. So how do we architect the concept of a design decision or even a UX strategy from the architect level that the development and the design can both utilize? Well, from a design token perspective, when I clarify a color, well, that color, I mean, it's easier now with the frameworks that we have for cross-platform development, but the color, the way that I bring about that color is not going to be the same in all the platforms. It's not going to be the same on a TV. It's not going to be the same on even, let's say, a printed platform, if you will. And so how do we actually convey these design decisions in a way that each team is able to know this is what it is we're trying to reproduce, but I have the freedom to recreate that in the way that I know how within the platform that I'm actually building for. And so that's where we need to really talk a lot about this idea of design tokens as being an abstraction for brand values and different elements, and especially as we start to introduce the voice platform. How do we carry over ideas that were traditionally very visual in nature and be able to then map those over to some sort of an audio experience? And that's something that leads hand in hand to UX mapping. So how do we create these layers of emphasis? How do we create these layers of importance? How do we create intention mapping in our application so that we can say, as a UX person, I want to go from this screen to a intent to buy, or I want to go from this one element to this desired intention. Well, again, developing that from a TV experience where I'm kind of clicking around with a remote, or a mobile app across all the platforms, to even a watch, These are all different interfaces, and I have developers and teams that are specialized in solving those problems in those specific contexts, that if they have this shared vocabulary where they can say, okay, I understand what they're meaning when they say use this with this design token, and I understand what they're meaning when they want this intention to happen, and I have the freedom to implement that the best way possible without being given, a one-to-one pixel representation, or without being given having to say, okay, well, I need the content people to paste in this color red every time they go into the CMS. These are areas where we're able to abstract out and lift out the value, the intention behind our system, so that our teams, as they're building prototypes, as they're iterating, are able to move very rapidly through this iteration process. And so how do you then sort of create this synergy in communication? Well, you need to have cross-department awareness. One, on deadlines. So you need to be able to have a clear overview so that the design team knows what the development's supposed to be releasing for their next prototype push. And the content team as well. Everybody needs to be aware and on the same page of who's potentially a little bit stressed that day, or even maybe there needs to be a little bit of an extra push where everybody comes together for a pizza jam session and is able to get the project done. Deadlines are a critical piece in communicating across the departments if you want to embrace an effective prototype strategy in your company. And then the second one is business motivation. It could be that the design department, if they know what the actual business intention here behind this prototype is, they'll see for themselves that this design is too busy, or that the important piece is actually hidden away and lost in the details, or the developers will say, this animation or whatever else is not needed at this level of the prototype, this level of fidelity. We're trying to get an approval on these criteria, and this thing that I'm spending a lot of time on, while it's neat, cool, and fun, is just not going to bring the value that that we want to bring at this level of the prototype. And then that can be something that you push down to the next level. And so when you put all of that together, when you talk about this abstraction, and each team is able to focus and specialize and be able to interpret what the design tokens and what the UX mapping and what the deadlines they understand, or what these different goals are, when they're able to interpret those in context of the domain that they know, well, then you have ownership of every single person in the company on the prototype. And time again, the research shows that if an individual contributor has ownership in the process, they will simply just be able to produce at a higher level because they know what the goals are. They know what the intentions are. They feel like they belong to the process. They have pride in the prototype, and they're not just feeling like somebody's pushing back something on arbitrary values, that there's just no communication across the board about what these two things are supposed to mean. So that's an important piece in the prototype process, is creating a sense of ownership. And you do that by giving everybody the tools they need to understand what the prototype is trying to accomplish, and by letting each individual team do their best work, and allow each, and then in that, each of the tools and each of the tooling processes need to be siloed into those specific scopes. So structuring the prototype process, number two, choose tools that scale in fidelity. Okay, so that's really an important concept to understand. You have very early stage prototypes, which could be a whiteboard and string process. So you have the soft production all the way up to the big production, right? So you have the soft production where we're live with that beta on there. And then you have, this is the go live. This is when social media is on board. This is when the campaign happens, when the CEO cuts the ribbon and the balloons go flying, right? This is the big time. And everywhere along that process is an important step. But what I mean by choosing tools that scale in fidelity is there's one common thread that's shared between the soft production and the big production, and it's still production. You still need access controls. You still need the ability to scale. You still need all of these tools that will actually be able to grow with you in the levels of prototype fidelity. So starting with the first time you're putting content in a database or design system, you need to be able to choose tooling that ideally are responsive in pricing and in sensitivity to where the business is at with the idea, but it will not require you to re-platform, to grab a new tool, to grab a new process as you go up to the actual full-time production. This is where something like React Native or Ionic or even the Flutter or any of these mobile development tools. I know the context here has been a lot on just cross development in terms of mobiles, but really we're talking watches, we're talking television, we're talking native desktop applications, we're talking cars, we're talking, we're talking a lot of things on platform these days. What you need is a tool that is going to be able to scale with you as you deploy to these different targets. And with the frameworks out there now, what's nice is that you can get pixels on the page so fast. I mean, so fast, and be able to communicate the idea in such an expressive way that you're able to get that emotional investment early on. But clearly, as a developer, you're like, that's really laggy. Oh, wow, that's going to be, a lot of jank, whatever you want to call it. That's something that you can develop, and you can find the flow and smooth it out. Worst case scenario, you may have to escape out into native code. But like the frameworks are getting really good, so there's actually a lot of pathways now. I'm more familiar with the React side personally, but there's a lot of pathways in these frameworks that you can optimize and optimize and optimize as you have time to go back and research and be able to add the finesse and the fidelity and the animations. So you need to find tools that will let you take those pathways, those natural pathways, get pixels on the page quickly, get content in the project quickly, get the design to developer workflow nailed down quickly, be able to abstract out your design tokens quickly and have a shared library that goes between all the developers and the stakeholders. Get that all in place rapidly, and then layer on the fidelity, layer on the structure, layer on the organization, layer on the finessing and the animations as you continue to build and build and build. Rule number 3, so lock-in is the greatest evil. If your tool doesn't have an API, you can't take it with you. Now, I'm sensitive to this as a solutions architect for a headless CMS, and I'm just going to touch quickly. If you're not familiar with the headless CMSs, that is API-driven content management. We have an editor backend interface where you type your content in, and you're able to then you're able to export that content through an API. So any platform, refrigerator, mobile app, Tesla, you name it, they can pull content from the CMS. And so but if you don't have an API access, you're going to be locked in to what that vendor tells you, how you can access your content, and you're going to be locked in then as well on the mercy of that provider for how fast you can adopt new tools and technologies. And in most cases, they're not going to be enabling you to have that prototype stage. With something like Graph CMS, you can just put an indexed HTML file up and pull content in that way. Any API headless content management system is able to really pull content early on, and that will scale with you all the way up to production. And you need to make sure your CMS has the tools that you will need it to have going forward for sure. Make sure that your framework will support the end goals. Make sure that it has all the different, CocoaPods or whatever else, once you start getting really nerdy into it. You need to make sure that it actually supports all the stuff you will need, but you don't need to have access to it right away or be forced to do it that way right away. You want to be able to build quickly and show that proof of concept early on with that prototype. So if your tool doesn't have an API, you can't take it with you. It's very similar to the second point here, and that is if your tool doesn't have an API, you can't take it with you. I just want to hammer that one more time because it is so critical in today's business development. You just have to have API-driven business goals. You have to. There is no question. And there's a lot of companies, I talk to them all the time, there's a lot of companies that don't get that yet. Help them understand, have patience, but don't back down. This is a must, that you need to have API access through all of your business services today, whatever it is, your CRM, your e-commerce, everything else. It's not API driven. It will get in your way and slow you down. Period. End. Okay, I think I've hammered that one enough. So important, so important. I see so many companies struggle really badly with that. Companies that even just a couple of years ago spent millions of dollars in renovating and digitizing their infrastructure, coming back again for round two already for an API-driven approach because the world and the consumer interest and goals and desire change quickly. So APIs lead the way. All right, so this is okay. This is a by me stack chart. Okay, this is a completely arbitrary and scaled by my personal preference stack chart here for choosing prototype tooling. Okay, I want to get that out of the way before anybody starts to rage tweet me. Okay. This is an example of how I kind of go through the process of choosing toolings for project, or even when I suggest to customers, and I'll use their weighting system to suggest the tools. I mean, GraphCMS is always going to be top right, but that's because I have to say that, and because it is. But this is kind of how I would weight something when I go ahead and build out a tool for a customer. Okay, so when we're talking about creating a process or digitizing their infrastructure, and I'm talking about building out their prototyping strategy and tools that'll help scale with them, I kind of put it on these two axes. One is the speed of prototyping, how quickly can we actually prove this thing works, and the other one is going to be then the how production ready will this be. Can it go game time when it's ready to go? So I put React Native plus Expo. I think that's a critical flow, solves some of the shortcomings of React by React Native on its own. So I think those two together are a critical combination. Obviously, both of those standalone, or Expo is not really standalone, but those two together, production ready. Flutter, production ready. Ionic, production ready. That's all fine. For me, and also I think just based on the size of the community and the amount of code that has already been put together because of a very visually focused community, I do think React Native, for me, has the advantage when it comes to speed of prototyping because there's a lot more pre-created components for clicking it together. That is, again, arbitrary based on my experience and me being primarily a React developer. When it comes to other tools, for example, actual click prototype building. So Framer, a tool that I love deeply, is one that is definitely not production ready. They have some code export abilities, but it's not production ready on its own application. Speed of prototyping as well. It's mixed, about halfway. I'm getting faster to it now, but if I'm onboarding another team member, back to zero. So it takes a lot of onboarding time, but once you have it, you can move pretty quickly. Figma, so speed of prototype, click and drag and everything, that's great. That's fine on the, but like prototype or production ready, no, it's not. So content structure-wise, Miro. So Miro is a tool that I use for every single project that I start off with. I do in Miro, and Miro is a digital whiteboard tool. Production ready? No. API access? Yes. Like a whiteboard with an API. That's a pretty cool promise. But it's really fast to work with that. One of the issues that it's not an issue, but one of the blessings and a curse of GraphCMS is that it's so fast to build out a schema. You can actually quickly create something without really thinking through it properly or seeing the whole picture first, and then going back and going, oh, well, actually, I should have gone back and done it this way. Miro is a great tool to start with in that case because it allows you to architect and map out everything that you want to do. And then you're able to say, okay, let's start replacing these with actual services. Miro is a fantastic tool. I recommend everybody actually use it. But it's for example, production ready, totally on the far left. But as far as speed of prototyping, like way up there. And then lastly on my little chart here, Keynote. And I know some of you are thinking can you prototype in Keynote? Well, yeah, old school style. So let's go ahead and wrap it up here real quick. the next phase here. We're going to talk about just really what again, this is a talk just based off of my experience working with a lot of large companies across the Americas, across the Eurozone, and even some Pacific Asian companies. Just the things that I've seen in the space that I think is exciting for the prototyping community, or the spirit of prototyping. So abstracted UIs, I think that's really fantastic with tools like React Native or like Ionic. Being able to say, let's get essentially a shared language between these two frameworks that we're able to then push and say, yeah, this is how we want to actually deliver the content. We're going to render it this way there. We're going to render it this way there. You have to write the code this way there. You guys know the drill. You all know the drill. Sorry. And I think abstracted UIs and creating a framework that's able to deliver to multiple platforms, fantastic. I mean, when I saw Expo go native application, website, mobile applications, all in the same code base, it just, as a prototyper, somebody who's deeply ingrained in that culture, that's fantastic. I love that. Headless content, centralized editorial, is kind of what I refer to it as. Headless content, I did a lot of agency days, and standing up a new CMS and having to try and understand and learn the new way to build a front end with that specific CMS's technology, slow. A lot of times expressive. A lot of those companies have put a lot of great thought into their process, but like, you can't argue with it. It is a slow process. And if you can say, you know what, my content team is going to be able to create their content workflow and input the content the way they want to work with it, all on their own, like, that is up to them. And I am totally separated from my front end in this regard. You have this idea of centralized content that is able to be consumed in any context where it makes sense. And that's a very, 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 very powerful paradigm that cannot be understated. Headless commerce. This is the one that actually gets me almost more excited than centralized content. That's because this was not the case up until a few years ago, I'd say, where this was really kind of a understood thing. Even Commerce Cloud from Salesforce is now switching to headless commerce. There's been some players in the space that have seen the light earlier on. I want to call out, Commerce Layer and Commerce Tools being big ones. But even the steadfast players like Salesforce, they're now embracing headless commerce. It's just, you can create such unique experiences for shopping, where I can just have a cart that kind of follows me from microsite to microsite, and mobile app and social engagement and whatever else. Fantastic. Really a great shift in the community. And the last one specifically for me is the idea of meshes or federation. Again, as a GraphQL player, this is something that I find extremely interesting. Not just because you have actual GraphQL mesh or even federation as top level like names in this space, but the idea in general that through one API, I would be able to access all of my different business critical pieces. So I could say I can access all of my content in line with weather, in line with my product warehousing information, in line with everything else, and be able to have those resolve intelligently and just in time or whatever else I needed to do. One API to my prototype team, go, and they can create magic. And I think that's really a fantastic change in the space. GraphCMS is just now implementing remote fields as well. So you can add, weather resolvers or PIM resolvers inside of your CMS, where you can just say, we don't need to be your PIM. You can bring your PIM, or you can bring your DAM, or you can bring whatever else you need to. Put it inside of GraphCMS and just resolve that in a single API. I don't want this to be a sales pitch talk, but that power of the mesh, that power of federated content, is just a fantastic experience. And I really just think everybody needs to embrace this and build their microservices in a way to be consumed by other services, not by the end user always, but specifically by other services. And that orchestration is a very important piece today. So I think that's really fascinating. That is actually all that I have today. You can, again, find me at Motley Dev on Twitter. That's some, and also on GitHub. I will be posting soon-ish. I'm off next week. I'll be posting soon-ish a demo where I actually show a little bit of this cross-platform actual development of the code, access to the repo. How do we kind of put this all together? How do the remote fields work? I'll be putting all that together and posting that out on Twitter that you'll be able to see. That's all I have today. I just kind of wanted to give one little out to the interface I have, just kind of show you a little bit where you can come and play around with some of this idea of prototyping out. Do have a look at it. This is Graphs CMS, schema building, drag and drop. Fantastic thing. I don't want to go too deep on it. It's not a sales talk, but it's something that I think is great. So that's it. I'm 5 minutes early for my timer. I'm not quite sure what the actual clock says, but Maria, you're back.
In my case, well, actually, you're almost on time. We have like 2 minutes left. And actually, what I also wanted to comment that so far we don't have any comments filled with hatred or anything kind of like that, as you mentioned when you were like comparing as well, Florida, for example, like among others. Like I would, in this
my
case,
experience.
Yeah, I understand. As I mentioned, by the way, I was really curious whether we will have like in one, because we had like previously discussed a lot of Flutter topics. So I thought will it be in one block, like one speaker from React Native development team, the other one from Flutter, and will there be like some kind of tensions? But so far we don't have them. And as far as we're discussing here today, like two major players on the market, Flutter and React Native. In this case, I'm sure that our audience actually, despite the fact that they might support one or the other, but they're very interested to find out a lot more in details about each of them. So maybe they will reconsider some of their preferences, definitely. Jesse, I really also loved the way you actually delivered the information for me. It was really exciting to listen to your presentation. I'll definitely, and we are definitely waiting for you to join us at our Q&A session, which is to take place in a bit more than 1 hour. So thank you so much. I think that the audience enjoyed your presentation. And moreover, as I mentioned, please prepare your questions for Q&A session. I know that they were like, if I'm not mistaken, still not so far because they already know that we have Q&A after all the presentations. But stay with us. I want to ask questions from the audience and maybe from myself. To all of you, I have questions. So definitely thank you so much and see you very soon.
Bye.
Bye.